That was an awesome, awesome experience in my life. I was a member of the choir for 6 years. Um, as I mentioned earlier, music has always been my interest. And I always, well, I'll go back to when I was just a little boy. And I had this thing I would do when I was all alone. I would get the record player and I would put on a Tabernacle choir record, and I would put it on the Battle Hymn of the Republic. We had a big mirror in our living room, and I would stand in front of the mirror and I would direct the Tabernacle choir as they sang the Battle Hymn of the Republic. And I must have been really good at it because they sang it the same way every single time. It was awesome. Anyway, my lifelong dream was to be in the Tabernacle choir. I mentioned the barbershop quartet earlier. One of the dads of one of the young men that was in the barbershop quartet with me was in the choir. And so I would always ask him questions about the choir and what was it like and what are you doing and how do I get in? And you had to be 30 in order to get into the choir. I was just counting the days until I got to be 30. And a month before I turned 30, my wife had our twins. And it was number 5 and 6, and the oldest was 7.5 years old. So our hands were full, let me tell you. It was crazy time at our house. And my wife came to me and says, I know how desperately you want to be in the choir, but I think we better put this off for a little while. I need some help. Well, just 3 years later, when I was 33, my wife came to me and says, I think it's time. I think we can do this. The kids are in nursery. I think I can pull off getting the kids ready into church. I think it's time. And so I called up, I ended up talking to Gerald Otley, because it was noontime and all the secretaries were gone, so it was Gerald Otley that answered the phone. The first question he asked me was, what's your suit size? He didn't want to know what part I sang. He didn't want to know anything else about me but my suit size, because I guess they have a wardrobe that they need to make sure that you're going to fit into. Then he talked to me about my music and what I had done, and he says, okay, I think you would qualify for an audition. And so he said, we'll send you out some papers, and we have an audition starting in just a week or so. And I knew this because of my friend's dad had told me auditions were coming up, go try it out. And so the audition process is brutal, and I won't go through the entire thing, but there is a lot to it. And the very first thing you do is a 2-hour written auditory test, music test, 250 questions that tested your theory, tested your ear, tested your knowledge of music, rhythms. I mean, it was all in that test. And the lady that was administering the test before we ever started stood up and said, I want to congratulate you for getting this far in the process of auditioning for the choir. And I thought, what? I called him 10 days ago and here I am. I thought, what have I done? Come to find out, there were sisters that had been waiting 1.5 years to just get to that point where they could take the test. Well, okay. And so the brutal test was over. We were all walking out the room, and there were people that were just sobbing because they knew that they hadn't done well on the test. Well, got the results back. I passed the test. There were other things. I had to send in a tape. The last thing I had to do was an in-person audition. Very, very high pressure. The room we were in wasn't any bigger than our family room here. There was a piano, and there was Gerald Otley, his wife, and Donald Ripplinger, who was the associate conductor. Those three were in the room, and I'm thinking, you can't have much more pressure than this. Anyway, I did okay, I guess, because I was able to get in the choir. And it was interesting. I got to just share this little bit. I thought I was pretty accomplished musically. I could sight sing. I had sung a bunch. I had a good voice. I could sing high. And so I thought, I can do this. 10 minutes into being in that first rehearsal, I thought, what am I doing here? Because they were so much better than I was. And I thought, I can't possibly do this. One thing that I noticed fairly early in the Tabernacle Choir is when you're sitting in the middle of the choir, you're not hearing the Tabernacle Choir. It's so interesting. You could hear voices, and I could hear a voice up here that was a little bit flat, and one over here that was a little bit shrill, and one down here that was a little bit late. And you just heard individual voices, and you thought, well, this is not the Tabernacle Choir that I know. And about 6 months into my tenure in the choir, I had a sore throat, and so I was unable to participate that Sunday for the broadcast. And so I sat down in the tabernacle, and as soon as they started singing, it was the Tabernacle Choir again. It wasn't individual voices. It was the sound of the Tabernacle Choir. And I decided that day that there must be a spiritual filter that sits in front of that choir. It takes all of those individual voices trying their best to make that sound and pulls it in to what the Tabernacle Choir is. It was so awesome that day to realize that I was part of that. It was a very busy 6 years for the choir. I had several tours that I went on. In fact, we went on a lot of tours while I was for that 6 years. Probably the busiest 6 years the choir has ever had before or since. But I'll talk about one tour in particular that was especially meaningful for me, and that was the tour to go to Europe and the Eastern European countries in the Soviet Union. As we were preparing for that tour, negotiations had been made for all of the hotels, all of the buses, all of the meals. I mean, you can't imagine what goes into preparing for a tour, all of the back work that goes into that. And so we were along the process. It was probably, I would guess, 7 or 8 months before we were going to go on tour. And it was right then that the Gulf War erupted and Saddam Hussein went crazy, and total unrest, and dangerous to be anywhere in those places that we wanted to go. And so the president of the choir, it just so happened that just after this happened, there was a $500,000 deposit that had to be made on, I think it was the buses or the airline or something, a deposit that needed to be made that next Monday. This was a Friday. And so the president of the choir went to Gordon B. Hinckley, President Hinckley, who was the manager of the choir, and said, "Are we going to go on this tour? I got to make a $500,000 deposit Monday. Are we going to go on this tour?" And President Hinckley said, "Let me pray about it. I'll get back with you Monday. Come and see me Monday." And so the weekend went by. Monday, the president of the choir went to President Hinckley and says, "Have you thought any about whether we're going to go on this tour or not?" And President Hinckley said, "I've thought of little else." He said, "Make the deposit. By the time we're ready to go, the things in the world will be such that we can go." Well, think of what happened in that little span of time. Communism fell apart. All of those countries that were controlled by communism were now being granted their freedom. Everything changed there. The wall came down, and everything was at the perfect time for us to be able to go and accomplish what we needed to do on that tour. what an amazing testimony that was to me of revelation, that President Hinckley knew that we'd be able to go on that tour. Well, we did some awesome things on this tour. We were going to, I think, 7 or 8 different languages and of countries. We toured several European countries. We toured Hungary and Czechoslovakia and Poland, and ended up in the Soviet Union. And so what we did was we learned a song for each country in their language. And this was like their song, okay? This was the song that was their country's, our song, what would be most meaningful for us. And that was the song we learned. And we also had pass-along cards that they had prepared for us for each country that we went to and each language that we were going to use, that we could use to give people that would say, if you're interested, here's how to get a Book of Mormon or talk to the missionaries or whatever. And so the plan was we were going to have these pass-along cards, and we would do the concert, and then when the concert was over, we would rush out the back doors and run around to the front of the concert hall and intercept people as they're coming out of the concert hall and try and talk to them. Well, how are we supposed to talk to somebody in Hungarian, or Polish? And we were terrified of this prospect, but we were going to do this because we're all missionaries, right? And so the first concert that we did in a foreign country was in Budapest, Hungary. The most unbelievable concert hall you can even imagine. It was the kind that had the balconies up there, and it was all just gold and big chandeliers, and you can't even believe what the place we were in. I had the opportunity on that tour to do some solo work with the choir, and so I was sitting on some chairs usually, or at least close to the audience during all of these concerts. And so at this first concert in Hungary, I watched the people come in, and you could see the years of communism on their faces. You could see what it had done to them. They were hard. They were cold. They weren't smiling. They just looked like they had been through a horrible experience, because they had, obviously. And so this was the audience. And I saw their faces, and I saw what they were looking like. And as we started the concert, we sang a few numbers, and you could start to see this hardness falling off their faces, and you could see some light coming on in their eyes. That particular concert, we did music in the spoken word. So there was 30 minutes during that concert that we asked the audience not to clap or to make any noise, because we were doing music in the spoken word. Well, at the end of that 30 minutes, when they were able to clap again, they just went bananas. They stood up, they clapped, they were so thrilled with what they were hearing and what they were feeling and what they were experiencing. By the time we got to the end of the concert, we would usually do like the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which really gets people rocking. And then we would do this national hymn. And by the time we got finished singing that hymn in their language, they were beside themselves. They didn't even know how to respond. Clapping wasn't enough. They were just standing and in awe of what they were feeling, and you could see it on their faces. And so the concert was over, and it was time for us to rush out, right, and go around to the front of the concert hall. And we were all pretty panicked about what this was going to be like, and we were standing there. And I remember a lady came up to me, and I thought, okay, it's 0 hour, I've got to do something here. And she just looked at me and she said in broken English, "What is this I'm feeling?" And It was such an awesome experience, and this happened time and time again in all of the concerts that we did in the Eastern Bloc countries. They were just overwhelmed with the spirit that they were feeling, and it turned out not to be a horrible experience, but such a joy to be able to talk to them and share with them a card and say, if you want to learn more about what you're feeling, here's a card for you. And it was such a remarkable experience. When we were in Berlin, doing our concert in Berlin, it was during that concert that it was decided that Berlin was going to be the new capital of Germany. And so we had done this concert, okay? We'd done the battle hymn. We'd done their awesome hymn. They were already worked up. And then this guy stands up at the end of the concert and makes the announcement that Berlin has just been made the capital of Germany. They went bonkers. I mean, it was just amazing to be there and experience this. When we were in Poland, the last of the soldiers left Poland, of the communist soldiers left Poland the day of our concert. When we were in Russia, Elder Oakes and Elder Nelson were in the Soviet Union with us. And they had meetings with the newly elected president of Russia. And he gave them permission for the church to be in all of Russia, for missionaries to be there, for church meetings to be held. That opened up the gospel to 200 million people in just one meeting. And this all happened while we were there on this tour. It was such a remarkable experience and so life-changing for so many people that got to hear about the gospel and that got to feel the Spirit. My 6 years in the choir were phenomenal. When I was set apart to be a choir member, the choir president set me apart, and I was surprised because he set me apart as a missionary to do missionary work as a member of the Tabernacle choir. And then I realized that in my patriarchal blessing, it promises me that I'm going to do missionary work for all of the people of the world. I had no idea when I received that blessing how that promise was ever going to be fulfilled. And now I know.